Okay, I believe it's 3 o'clock. My panelists are all here and we're going to get started. Is everybody ready? Hello, everybody. Welcome. My name is Ruth Bruss, and I am the Vice President of Learning Services and Solutions for Media Education, and I'm going to be today's webinar facilitator. And I just thank you so much for attending with us today. We hope that today's webinar is going to provide you with some inside scoop on designing and implementing a successful forward-thinking CTE program. We have a panel of experts that are going to share their top tips, best practices, and really their lessons learned from the field. Whether you're an administrator looking to launch a new CTE program or refresh on an existing one, or any architect seeking to design effective CTE-tailored spaces, our goal for you today is to walk away from this webinar feeling equipped with the information to really future-proof your CTE program for long-term success. Our overarching walkways are that we want you to understand the importance of CTE, understand the keys to creating an effective CTE classrooms, specifically when it comes to function and design, and an understanding of the importance in building strong industry partnerships. So before we begin with our panelists, though, as I was thinking about this webinar, I thought it might be great to provide you with a few quick tips or quick facts about CTE. So one of the questions that's always asked is, how many CTE students are there really in the United States? Well, Career and Technical Education is working in every state and U.S. territory to help meet the country's very real and immediate challenges of economic development, student achievement, and global competitiveness. So there are technically a total of 12.3 million students that are enrolled in CTE programs across the country. That's a lot of students that are getting that hands-on learning in their schools. There are some primary goals of a CTE program, but the overarching is that the CTE provides or prepares students for the world of work by introducing them to workplace competencies, and makes that academic content accessible to students by providing it in a hands-on context. And you're going to hear us talk a lot about that with the panelists today and what that looks like. There are really 4 components to a well-rounded CTE program. We say that you have classroom instruction. So you have to think about the space for that, laboratory learning, work-based learning, and student leadership. So overall, a successful CTE program, by definition, is a high-quality, integrated curriculum and instruction informed by labor market information, which you're going to hear about today, student interest, technology, industry standards, and real-world engagement through relevant work-based learning opportunities. Sounds really big and bold. And trust me, I've learned so much about CTE in the past year. I really wish I had more advantages of this when I was actually in school myself. We know that creating a CTE classroom requires really careful considerations of various factors to ensure that they're effective and really help with that learning. So on this slide, you're going to see 10 key considerations. I wanted to share these with you. I'm not going to read them through. There is in no way that we are going to be able to talk about all of these today. So our panelists, we've really decided we're going to really drill it down to, again, that design and the, some of the industry needs and such. But that doesn't mean we won't come back and do another one of these CTE webinars where we can drill it down even more so. So I'm ready to get started, and I need to introduce to you today our panelists. So we have, whoops, I went too far. We have 5 panelists with us today. And I just want to tell you a brief little synopsis of each one so you can see the types of questions that I'm going to ask them and why they would be the ones that we'd be asking to answer them. So first we have Bethany Smith. Hello, Bethany. Bethany has over 13 years in K-12 education experience. She has transitioned from teaching to district administration. And while she was in the district, she had secured a $7 million grant as a CTE coordinator. Later, as a leader in curriculum and instruction, she coached teams, provided professional development, and revised social studies resources as well. Now she is a learning experience coordinator at Media Education, and she applies all of the information and all of her expertise for instruction to support schools in creating dynamic and educational environments aligned with their vision and enhancing student engagement. So thank you very much, Bethany, for being with us today. Our second panelist is David Kempsky. In 2005, David founded the AET Labs, initially focused on technical teaching solutions for schools and universities. Over time, AET evolved to provide consulting services for new school construction, specializing in what we're talking about today: layout, space planning, and equipment consultation for maker spaces and engineering labs. David has a background in mechanical engineering technology. He has identified the gap between industry's demands and educational offerings, and he's leading to the establishment of the AET Labs. All of that he's put into his knowledge. So thank you, David, for being here with us today as well.
Nice to be here.
Our third panelist is Stephanie Van Zandt. Stephanie, she's based in North Florida, lives in Florida. She holds dual degrees in architecture and architectural studies from the University of Florida. She has 23 years of design experience. She also works for Meteor Education, and since joining Meteor Education, she has earned multiple awards, and she's currently the PDX design leader, focusing on training and mentoring designers. She collaborates with clients to create tailored educational spaces, emphasizing unique visions and instructional goals as part of Meteor Education's commitment to personalized design solutions for schools and districts. The company's team of over 40 designers ensures dedicated attention to each project, and she is integral in ensuring that they understand all of the needs for the various projects. So welcome, Stephanie. Thank you for being here. Then we have Diego Barrera. Diego is the Director of Design at WRA Architects. He brings nearly 2 decades of experiences in education design and is an accredited learning environment planner. So he serves as Vice Chair of AIA's Committee of Architecture for Education. He fosters innovation and awareness in educational facility design. Diego also is a fellow of Leadership ISD. He leads research and develops designs that respond to the community's needs, translating visions into progressive educational spaces. Super excited to have you here today. Thank you, Diego.
Thank you.
And our fifth panelist is John Oberle. He's a former teacher and lifelong advocate for student voice, agency, and opportunity. His education career started in the 9th grade algebra classroom, and he has continued through student leadership development, school board coaching, and state-level policy advising. He now empowers educators and school leaders as the Senior Director of Strategic Engagement here at Meteor Education. So thank you, John, for being a part of our panel today. So we're going to get started with some questions. Everybody ready? Everybody? Okay. So I'm going to start with where we all start when we start thinking about that we're developing something, and that is with our budget and funding. So I'm going to start out asking some questions. Just so our audience knows today's format, we have all of our panelists have identified questions that they would like to respond to. As they're asked these questions, they're going to respond to them, and there might be some slides that you'll see kind of progress. You can view those. They supplied some of those for us as well. If you should have any questions that are related to the question that's being asked, and or something, a thought like, I need to get this answer, you made me think of something, go ahead and put that in the box. We will also at the end of this webinar have time for folks to answer questions. So I'm going to start with our first question on budget and funding, and I'm going to point the question to Bethany. Bethany, can you share with our audience what are the sources of funding for CTE programs, and really how stable are these funding streams?
Yeah, so there are really kind of 3 buckets of funding streams. One is going to be local, and then you're going to have your state funding, and you're going to have your federal funding. And your most stable funding is going to be your federal funding. In 2018, they reauthorized the Strengthening Career and Technical Education for the 21st Century Act, which more informally is known as the Carl Perkins Act. And that is probably one of our most stable funding sources for career and technical education. So we get that money from the federal government. And then you'll also see grants offered by different agencies. So one that I've worked with was the Youth Career Connect grant, and that came from the Department of Labor. You'll see various other grants come out. There's an innovation grant right now from the Department of Education that schools have applied for. So you have those federal models. And then there's state funding. So every state does this differently. And there are kind of 4 major models for state funding. The first is it's student-based. So based on the number of students you have enrolled in your program, your state is going to reimburse you a certain amount of money. Then there's a resource-based allocation. So that might be like what they do in Illinois and North Carolina, where every district gets a minimum allocation, and then it's based on the number of teachers or resources that they need. And then there's cost-based, which is how we do it where I am here in Colorado, which is you submit your actual program costs to the state and they reimburse a portion of it. They are not reimbursing everything. And then there's a hybrid, which is kind of going to be a mix and match of all of these. And so every state does those differently. There's a state funding equation in each location, and that will determine kind of how much reimbursement is available. And then the last one that I don't even have a visual for here is local. And that's going to be industry partnerships, industry grants. A lot of the time you're going to see school districts partner directly with someone in their region. So in California, when they're doing the career academies, it might be a resource company is going to sponsor that for a program that's on natural resources. So the community is investing in those programs as well. And then school districts invest money based on their school budgets. So those are kind of all of the different funding streams.
So I have a follow-up question for you, Bethany, on
Okay.
that. Can you get multiple funding streams for a given school? So you can have some federal, you can have some state, you can have some local.
Almost always you're going to have at least 2 funding streams for a program. You're going to have school district-based dollars. And those are going to be state or local property tax based, and then some funding reimbursements. Now, for any of the federal or state monies, it has to be what we call an approved program. So in each of the states, and we'll talk about this a little bit more, there's an authorizing agency, and there has to be an approved program at the school, and that program has to meet certain criteria in order to be an approved program. So in the state of Colorado, the community college system is our authorizing agency. And so they're going to approve the program. And once it's become an approved program through that state agency, then you can apply for Perkins dollars. So you can apply to have some additional money put in, or you can apply for your state reimbursements.
Thank you. So David, what are some factors that you've seen that drive the funding for CTE programs, specifically when it comes, because you're putting in a lot of labs and lab equipment in there, into these spaces?
Yeah, I mean, I would take a step back and certainly tee off on what Bethany was saying. But the major factor I'd say is starting out with where's the skills gap. So if you look at it from that 10,000-foot view, there's a lack of qualified workers in certain sectors, and they're identified by our government in the Department of Labor. So areas like manufacturing, information technology as it relates to like cybersecurity, healthcare, those are some of the major markets that where we're having, there's a major problem with finding qualified workers, and it's due to a number of reasons. So there are large-scale federal dollars, like Bethany was saying, that have come to support these sectors, which in turn go to get funneled to the schools. And so those could be CTE centers, they could be technical colleges that still kind of fall in that same bucket. And then, I look at also to talk about what you said too, Bethany, is on the state level, that's when you kind of say, okay, what are the industries in my region that are at risk? So look local. And, I know there's some examples of advisory boards that I've been on and labs that we've worked on. And there's an automotive dealership that is looking for workers. They don't have enough workers, so they're super active on the advisory boards, and they provide, they'll provide money towards the program to help to support it. So it's that local getting private sector funding, state funding, of course. It's that varies from state to state. Right now, state of Massachusetts, where I'm at, There's a lot of money that gets pumped into the state, by the state, into the CTE programs. There's a whole host of other factors. I won't go on that long of it, but the other one too is student engagement too. So if you don't have a program that, you know, is going to attract students, but that goes all the way up the line. What are the skills? What are the needs? Is it an industry that students are interested in going into? And so that's really that's a big factor right there. So a colleague of mine is always saying, where the money flows, where the money flows, where the students go.
That makes a lot of sense. That makes a lot of sense. Thank you. And Stephanie, from an interior designer, are there any innovative design approaches that can enhance really that overall learning environment while really staying within some budgetary constraints?
Yeah, I think, you know, piggybacking off what David said, you know, when you engage the local community, and you're working with, you know, local industry partners, community members that see that need firsthand, what's missing, what do we need to fill in our community, we would want to work with those folks. And so, you know, when we get to the FF&E, the overall budget that we have to work with obviously is important. And so from an FF&E perspective, you know, we're going to work with manufacturers and vendors that offer relevant equipment and furnishings for what we want to outfit. But we've also worked in programs where community members, industry leaders will come and they might donate some equipment. And so that, you know, helps with the budget. And in doing that, you know, they can also obviously donate time and expertise in that. Another option when we're talking about FF&E is, you know, if we've got, say, a classroom space and then a lab or working space within the school, what items can I use in both of those spaces? And so some of those items can do double duty. So whether I'm selecting seating based on, you know, I can move it from point A to point B, or work tables that are mobile that can go from the classroom to the lab area for workspace. Maybe technology, you know, TV carts or mobile marker boards that can be used in both, or mobile storage. For example, a cosmetology cart that's mobile can be used in the classroom area where students are maybe learning how to organize their supplies and how they have access to those materials, but then we wheel it into the cosmetology lab and they're then using it as they're practicing those skills and tasks. So always looking for ways that things can do double duty for space and for budget. And then another thing we talk about in education FF&E is sometimes kind of phasing. So depending on when budget becomes available, when equipment maybe becomes available, we might outfit the classroom side of that space first. And then maybe next semester we come back and we outfit with some of the equipment, whether, you know, I joke about bake sales, you know, with clients, but sometimes that's a thing, you know, community members, they come and do some sort of local fundraising, or, you know, something that really, they see a need, they want to outfit a school or a space for students, and they see that need and they get involved and they're active in that. And so they can, you know, do things to provide funding. So phasing things in can help with the budget as well.
Perfect, thank you. So let's move on to talk about the CTE standards. And Bethany, being that you were the educator and at a district level, how does the CTE curriculum align with state and national standards? Does it align?
Yes. So every state has CTE standards. The states on here that are in teal are going to be ones that are different by state. And then the states in navy blue have a common set of technical standards, similar to something like the Common Core, but these are the common technical standards. And so every program is going to be aligned to those. In the state of Colorado, both the secondary and post-secondary programs are aligned all the way through. And so that goal is that there's a seamless transition from secondary into post-secondary. Where do those standards come from? They come from the industry. And so different school, state boards of education will pull advisory committees together to build out those career and technical standards. Within those career and technical standards, there's always some overarching post-secondary and workforce readiness standards. So those are just things about how to you know, be in the workplace. And so we call those in Colorado power standards, PWR, post-secondary workforce readiness standards, and those would be for any program. And then for every single industry, you're going to have a number of standards that they have to meet in the program, just like you would in a math class or in a social studies class or in a science class. So yep, they have those, and the way that they're aligned is through the use of advisory boards. And I know we'll talk a little bit more about advisory boards and advisory committees in a little bit. But that is what industry is telling the school or the district is needed from the program. So just as David said at the very beginning, like it's all about meeting that skill gap, filling in where the workforce sees that need.
Excellent. And do you feel that both the academic and the CTE curriculum really provide a well-rounded education for students when you blend those together? Have you seen a lot of success in that?
Absolutely. And in many states, you can do something where you're getting dual credit, where you're getting both academic credit and you're getting your career and technical credit. So if it's something like a biomedical science pathway, you're getting some of your science credits taken care of as well. Or if some will even have a construction math course where it's geometry that's really based on construction standards, and how to build a house and how to use those angles and that kind of thing. So it's a really neat way for programs to be able to engage students differently and see the relevance in the academic content as well as prepare them for a career.
Yeah, I piggybacking off that. I went to a CTE classroom where they were building what they call the tiny houses, the tiny house. And they had the math classroom in the front, and then they were doing the actual building in the back and using what they had learned with angles and such. And then they donate those to the homeless. So I thought that what a great community project as well, while you're learning everything. So Diego, I'd like to ask you, in what ways can architectural design facilitate collaboration among the teachers, really to support integrated CTE curricula?
Well, I think, it depends how the CTE center or CTE classes are set up. But one of the things that's unique with the CTE programs, especially when they're all under one house, under one roof, is that the careers that our students are going to graduate to are not necessarily the careers that they're following with that CTE program. And so on the fringes of those programs, the collaboration between the cosmetology and health, or robotics and woodworking, those fringes of interest prepare students to succeed in their future. So by housing these programs together and creating areas, we're seeing Vanguard Academy here in Mesquite ISD in North Texas, but creating spaces that are purposeful for those programs to collaborate. Because it might seem like if you're doing, construction technologies, there's nothing that no reason to collaborate with, say, health sciences. But even just on the basics, on the maths, on the health side, those areas of collaboration really spark the interest from both programs, and also create sort of opportunities for those students to sort of broaden their horizon there.
Awesome. So let's move into some talk about the industry partners. Bethany, you've mentioned this a couple of times. So how are industry partnerships established and maintained, really to benefit CTE programs?
So there's a lot of different ways that industry partnerships are built, but one of the ways that they're most clearly integrated, and I think we have a slide on this, is through advisory boards. And so every approved program, one of the key components to having a program get approved is you have to have an advisory board. And that can either happen at the school level or it can happen on a district level for each industry. And that's really where you're starting to bring in the people from your local community to get involved and sit and really advise, what are the courses that need to be a part of this pathway? How are we ensuring that the learning that's going on in the classroom really meets the current industry standards? So that we're not teaching a software program that is no longer being used by industry. So that we are making sure that the way students are practicing is the way they're going to see it in the workplace. The other thing that those advisory boards then do is they provide those internship opportunities, those apprenticeship opportunities. They allow students sometimes to have their classroom be physically on location at the industry building. So a school doesn't necessarily need to have every single thing they need to run a fire science program. They may have the basics, and then the students may go down to the fire station and work directly there for part of their experience. The other thing, and what you see on the screen, are career and technical student organizations. This is the leadership component, the student leadership component, but this is also where industry comes right alongside our students. and builds them up and helps them to really learn about what goes on in these different fields. Career and technical student organizations all have a leadership component, and they're considered co-curricular activities. So it's not just outside of the classroom, it's inside the classroom as well. And then most of them have a competition component as well. So the ones you might be most familiar with are things like DECA and FBLA, because you'll see those in most comprehensive high schools. But all of these different organizations really provide those wraparound services and can help plug industry right in with the program. Because a lot of people in the industry have gone through those programs before, have seen the value in that, and then continue to pour back into the program.
I was in FBLE. I remember it from quite a long time. Florida, is that Florida Business Leaders? I mean, Future Business Leaders. Future Business. Okay, I'm from Florida. I'm thinking Florida. So yeah, Future Business Leaders. I do remember the competitions. I loved it. So Stephanie, tell us, how can the interior designer contribute to creating a physical environment that aligns with this hands-on industry relevant curriculum within our CTE programs?
You know, like Bethany mentioned, you know, working with local community and advisory boards, and on those advisory boards, you have people that have done the work, that are in that industry, that are in that field. And so, you know, I want to work with those folks as well. We're going to work with the client, the CTE instructors, and the industry partners we have, and additionally our LEC team, to create the environment that's going to support the curriculum and the activities and the tasks for those industry programs. And so, you know, they're going to be the best source of information. I'm not a welder. I don't really know anything about welding, but a welder knows everything about welding, and he's going to know, or she's going to know, how the space needs to be laid out, what types of equipment needs to be in there, what kind of, you know, how they learn, like what's the steps of learning this industry. And so I need to talk with them, you know, in order to create that physical environment. I need to understand what happens when you get to the space, you know, what are you learning, you know, different things like that. And so we're going to work with programs. We work with programs in the past that have invited the community to partner with the district. And so they're leaning on their community to donate time and expertise, not only just to work with me or the architecture firm to, you know, design the space, physically lay it out, but then also to come back and, you know, share their expertise with the students. And so it's kind of a holistic, well-rounded thing. Like, it, you know, it doesn't happen, none of it happens in a vacuum. It really is all about collaboration with those industry partners, with those advisory boards, with your teachers on site, to, you know, kind of create that whole program. And you can't create the program without the space to go in it, you know, or the space to put it in. And you can't have, you know, it's kind of codependent. You know, you got to have the curriculum and the space to do it. So
it's definitely a collaboration. CTE is not just a one subject or one person. A lot of collaboration. That's why we have a panelist here, a set of panels with lots of different folks. So Diego, when you're building a CTE facility, are there any design strategies to create spaces for industry events, workshops, or presentations within that facility? Do you all consider that?
Yeah, I think, you know, as we've been talking in this section, the collaboration with industry and industry being in these spaces is really important to the success of these programs. So part of the conversation is these spaces are not extra, right? So like a Vanguard that you see on the screen, that big open area in the middle, and basically what we did was combine what would be their dining and their library and another public space into one big space, so that we could create a space where industry could come in. You could have job fairs for students. You could have universities come in and do a college fair. And it's also a presentation area, but the reality is that budgets are not infinite. So finding creative ways to find this space and to make it available to serve several purposes. In the case of this high school, it was by combining dining and library and making it super flexible, where it could sort of shift from different purposes. But more importantly, the conversation early on is about, well, this is not a space that would be a nice to have. It is a space that we need to have, because otherwise students cannot engage with the community and with the industry in a way that would make it more successful in their future career.
Can I ask a question?
Yes, sir.
So it feels like there's a potential source of tension between like the amount of money that we have, the vision that we have for the program, the vision that the community has for what they want to be true for students, the space that we will eventually house these programs in, right? I wonder, Diego and Bethany, if you guys can talk a little bit about the like navigation of those tensions between community members who are going to be community members for kind of like for the foreseeable future, and then adults who are currently engaged in this work at an advisory level or a district level, but who may not be permanent fixtures of this program throughout the course of its development. Like, how do you deal with that tension?
It's a great question.
Yeah, I would just mention that, kind of to Bethany's point, sometimes the best teaching space is going to be at the industry, at that industry partner, right? So why would we replicate a a collision mechanic shop if that shop is ready and able and willing to bring students to do the work there? So I think that by having that strong sort of advisory council that sees the need, and also finding creative ways to find the funding to support it, I think is sort of a way to have that conversation.
I think another, and to your point, Diego, another way is to open up the spaces to be not just K-12 spaces, so to be community spaces in the evenings. So what we're seeing happen a lot of times when there's a big new remodel is that it becomes a career center that can be used, yes, for K-12 purposes in the morning, but then in the evening, the community college is also partnering and using that space for their advanced manufacturing program. So they're putting some money in as well to help build up that program, and then it can be utilized year round instead of just during a school year, and it can be utilized in the evenings. So you're creating those like community partnership spaces as well, and that's a source both of funding and just of community buy-in too.
And I believe this was the slide, Bethany, that you were referring to before. So is this the one that you referred to when we were talking about ensuring that the CTE curriculum aligns with all of the local industries as well?
Yep. I can't say enough about the importance of an advisory committee. Stephanie brought it up in the design process. You cannot, as a district leader, as even a school principal, be an expert in all of these different fields. You're not working in those fields. But you have industry experts who are working in the field and who are very passionate about making sure we fill this skills gap. And so that's where the program advisory committee is so critical to the success of any program.
Okay, wow, there's a lot of information. And so we've talked a little bit about budget and funding. I know we could probably have a whole series on that, and curriculum alignment and some industry partnerships, but I'm going to move into some questions about space and layout. And again, for those of you that are here listening to the webinar live, if you have any questions, feel free to throw those in the chat. Jono, let me just double check before I move on. Were there any questions that were thrown in the chat for this first kind of section?
Not that I can see so far, but we're ready to field them.
Okay, so I'm going to, as I said, move into space and layout, and I'm going to start with you, Jono. We've been talking about CTE, but what exactly, when we talk about the space design, we haven't really talked about what are all the different CTE spaces that we're having to create. And we know that obviously we've talked about that some of them are created based on what the industry or the community's asking, but can you go a little deeper into that and explain the CTE spaces?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, the reality is that there are a vast number of industries and jobs that we're attempting to create spaces for, to prepare students for, and the kind of relevant skill sets that students will need to be able to be successful in those places include some skills that really make sense to be learned in a like straight industry style professional space. Especially the hands-on skills that they are going to be using every day if they're thinking about manufacturing or thinking about health sciences. If I'm going to learn how to be a phlebotomist, it would be nice to have a place where I can practice putting needles in people with their permission, of course. The other reality is that the students that we're providing this type of support for are still young people and have a broad set of what we've been calling soft skills, but in reality are not very soft and are incredibly important for success, both in the industry that they're headed into and in life after they graduate. And so for the type of designs that we need to be thinking about for secondary CTE spaces, they need to, I think, have a balance between professional grade experience, and it should look like a real weld shop where I might do real welding. And it also needs to have spaces that function as classroom spaces that I would use for collaborative inquiry or dialogue or full group learning, some types of activities that might not actually take place in the real professional environment where I'm going to go be a welder. And so I think that's a balance that those of us working in this space need to strike.
Okay. And Diego, how can the design support the creation of flexible spaces that can adapt to changes? And as we said, we never know if the programs and technology are going to be the same, if things are going to change. So how do you design something knowing that it could change in 5 years, 10 years, and you know this is the space, this is all they're going to get right now?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a couple of approaches there. I would start with saying that there's just, to simplify it into three ways as how districts build, especially the specialized labs, right? Like a welding lab, robotics, or something like that. Depending on the size of the public school system, you might have like a centralized building or a couple centralized buildings that do your CTE programs. And the approach there, the benefit of doing that is that then you can have you can invest in the facility knowing that it's used all day long as you bring kids from different high schools into this building, and it's easier to hire for that one building. Maybe a drawback would be that kids need to travel, right? And so maybe typically the way you see it is half day they're at their home campus and the other half of the day they're here. So the travel might be a little bit of a challenge, and also for the students themselves, the scheduling of, if I'm doing fine arts or athletics, sometimes that doesn't work out completely. It's hard to accommodate every sport and every fine arts offering. The other way is have it at the high school, but then you either have specialized high school with one high school of health sciences, your other high school is auto collision, and then the students that want to do the other one have to travel. And so you either duplicate at each high school, which is not very efficient, or you basically preordain that it's a lot easier for the students on that side of town to go to healthcare and that side of town to do collision, or otherwise they need to travel. So there's the complications there. A third option, and Vanguard on the screen, is a dedicated high school. It's a comprehensive high school that is all CTE programs. And so when you go here, when you go to a high school like Vanguard, there's no travel and there's no pick a side of town. The shortcoming is that to accommodate the whole program is there's no athletics and there's no fine arts. The CTE fills the curriculum. So I don't know that there's a perfect formula for each district, and this is a way to simplify it. There's more than three. There's a variation of all of these, but I think making that decision early is important. One, and maybe a shout out to Austin ISD. One thing that they did on their educational specifications is that they, to the original question of how do you design flexibility, is that every shop, regardless of whether it's robotics, construction, auto, or everything that's in a big shop bay is the same size. And the idea is that about this size, about this high, will fit anything that needs to teach 24 students or 24, 30 or whatnot. And so the idea is that then we can go back 10 years down the line and refurbish this space and turn it from auto collision to robotics or aviation or whatnot by having the right infrastructure. But the investment up front, it's a little bit bigger. You might say, well, I really didn't need 30 feet of height in the roof for auto collision, but I got it because in the future I might have it. So it's about having that early conversation, knowing that the investment might not pay off today, but it will pay out in the life of the building.
Absolutely.
Diego, just kind of to add on to that, like when we're thinking about putting FF&E into these spaces, we're designing for 30 years. And so these programs are going to change substantially over that time. So making sure that we're asking good questions and talking about how can this furniture or this storage solution be flexible and adaptable as the needs of the program change is critical to helping districts protect their investment. And so that's really cool. Did you say it was Austin ISD that was? really thinking about how can we make sure these spaces are such that we can make those changes over time.
Thank you. So David, I have a question for you. What are some factors you have to consider when it comes to equipment? Because there's a lot of big equipment in these CTE labs when you're designing a space.
Well, it's interesting to tee off what you guys were just saying, Diego and Bethany, about planning for the future. First thing I was going to talk about with this in this segment is state agencies that have buy-in on these schools. Like here in Massachusetts, we have the Massachusetts School Building Authority, and they help support. Taxes in the state go to help support these new construction projects, and there are minimum guidelines to the designs of these labs that they have to adhere to if they want that funding. So it's for that reason. They want those schools to be relevant 30 years down the road. So that was like one of the big things I wanted to mention. But then you get into some of the other things that just considerations. Of course, safety. We're always looking at safety and whether it's age appropriate, whatever the equipment is, but just looking at the space, like mobility, just making things so they're mobile, on wheels, little things like that. Is the equipment going to be floor mounted or can it sit on a bench? I mean, this segment could almost be more like, okay, what kind of nightmares have we run into after the fact, right? Because that's a huge thing. We've gone in after the fact.
Will you tell us about one?
Well, I mean, I guess really what it would be. I mean, that's floor mount or storage. I'm sorry, floor mounting or bench top is one thing. But when you start to get into like services like your MEP, like your mechanical, electrical, or plumbing, that stuff that's hard, mounted into the walls, and it's tough to change that after the fact. So believe me, we've gone in and we've put lasers installed, expected lasers, laser engravers that require certain power, require exhaust, and even how that exhaust is turned on, making sure that you don't turn that laser on unless that blower is on too, to create a draft to exhaust the air out of the building. So those are things, if it's not thought about up front, can really have an effect down the road. So so mechanical, electrical, plumbing, storage, I think, is really a huge thing. Even with a laser, like it's not just a laser, you're going to be cutting and engraving on materials. Is that, can you have that nearby? That just goes across the board. And then I think some other just little things here too, actually big things, of course, like appearance too. I mean, you want it to be a show. Do you want it to be a show place? You want it to, is there going to be, it's going to be behind glass and people are going to be walking by it, of course. And the creativity, I think, is there as well. Sometimes, we get involved, not a lot of, not just brand new schools, but remodels and just doing one lab. And so being creative with the space, I think I provided a slide somewhere of a space where there once were, that's it right there, the one that says
Okay.
engineering technology. You can almost tell. So that behind the glass, that actually used to be lockers. There used to be lockers in that hallway. And so they were just desperate for space. And we said, hey, what about, and can you use that space there? They weren't even using the lockers. They pulled the lockers out and voila, look what we did. So sometimes being creative like that can find a solution.
I love
Can
it.
I ask, so we were on a CTE tour not too long ago and went into a space where students were working on all kinds of really neat projects. And I had never really thought about this from a teacher perspective, but each of the projects takes up, 6-7 cubic feet of space, right? You have 20 kids per class and 8 classes all making airplane parts. Suddenly we need, how do you end up thinking about balancing storage for the things we need to make the stuff, and then also the stuff that might get made in the space?
It's tough to predict that, ask the questions. That happens a lot with the teachers and having those interviews, I think, with people. So
Jono, I will say 100% of the time when we're in a discovery process or space design and we're going back and forth in that iterative design process, we always hear there's not enough storage, there's not enough storage. And so we
Yeah.
have really had to think about like, how do you have big open shelving and then maybe bins for the smaller components and
Yeah.
pieces? Because something like drones take up a
Right.
substantial amount of space. And so we really do have to, we have to be really mindful when we're both in the built environment and in the FF&E, that we're creating pockets and space for those things that can be secured.
Thank you. Great follow-up question, Jono. I'm going to move into a little bit. I just want to let the audience know I'm going to show lots of different in this little segment here. I'm going to still show space designs and some designs, but also just as you saw makerspace and engineering lab, you're going to see some other spaces as I ask the next question. So I'm just going to kind of click through. But my question is going to be to Stephanie. In what ways does the spatial layout promote how do you have to consider that efficient flow of students and educators that are within that facility?
Yeah, so, piggybacking off some of what's already been said, we start working on a CTE space, we want the FF&E placed in there the way it would be in the work environment, in order to prepare the students to get them used to how the room flows. I'm going to come in and I'm going to ask a boatload of questions. Bethany's going to do the same. So I'm going to want to know what happens in this space when the students first come in. What do they do? Are they coming into a classroom area where they're maybe sitting and learning, just getting introduced to some technical information? When are they moving into, a lab or working area that's kind of more of that authentic work environment? What does that look like? Where do they spend most of the time throughout the day or the semester or the year? And again, from before, can some of that FF&E from the classroom area transition to that work or lab area? So there's those kind of questions I'm going to ask. I'm going to ask about are there procedures that need to be followed? So, is there safety gear to consider in terms of where does that get stored? But then also, is there a space needed for students to don any sort of safety gear or certain types of equipment that they have to deal with? Are they gathering tools? Are those tools locked up somewhere? Where a person has to be responsible for that storage and access to that storage, or is it, free for all? Do students have their own set of tools? What happens with those things? Is there does there need to be like a cleanup or a prep area, to prepare something before you actually, carry that in to do the work, whatever the case may be? Access to tools and materials, the materials that they're using. If you're welding with pieces of metal and those raw materials, where does that go? Where is it stored? Who has access to it? Is it a separate room? So a lot of it is kind of around, a lot of it starts with the space of the building and the programming of the building. But then, we come in with the FF&E and hopefully we're actually collaborating together. I mean, I welcome any time that I get to work with an architect, closer to the front end as they're programming the building. And we're talking about some of these spaces because some of them are easy, to kind of add in later, an architectural drafting lab. That's an easy CTE space that I can put in a standard classroom. A welding lab, a cosmetology lab, a culinary lab, those are things that require at the base level, foundation work or electrical access to data, access to power, access to lighting, access to the outdoors, so a lot of that comes before I even get to the project. But if we can collaborate, at the beginning, let's look at the FF&E. Let's make sure it fits in here. Let's talk through how the students are going to move through the space and use the space. What does the teacher need? All those types of things. So there's like I say, there's a boatload of questions that go into all of that. And really the answers to those questions are going to affect how I lay out the space. And so, Diego and I and Bethany can get together and collaborate, but I still need the welder in the room or someone that's done that, or the cosmetologist, or the aviator, or the doctor, or the researcher, whatever fields we're trying to accommodate. We really is all about collaboration.
And I know I sound like a broken record, but bringing in someone from that advisory board that's directly from industry is super helpful. And it also ensures that the space is being planned in a way that meets all of the state requirements. So if it's a CNA program, the State Board of Nursing has very, very clear guidelines about what has to be in that space. So access to water, those kinds of things. And that has to be a collaboration between architecture, between design, and between the programming aspect of things.
Yeah.
So, Jono, I've heard the word collaboration. So I'm just curious. You said you visited some CTE classrooms. How did you see those spaces promote collaboration and hands-on learning? Did you actually see those that collaboration, hands-on learning being promoted in those spaces?
So I think the answer to the second part about hands-on learning, absolutely, right? Every CTE space that has like real life stuff that students get to put hands on and try and test and work with provides opportunities for hands-on learning. But like I talked about a little earlier, a lot of times there doesn't, at least design-wise, appear to be like dedicated or purpose-driven spaces for that type of collaboration. That doesn't mean that teachers can't do that, right? An excellent teacher is going to pull their class together to have a full group conversation about what we're about to do, or is going to create a space and move some stuff aside so that students can give each other feedback on something that they've recently done. But I think it's up to us to design with some intention around how the instructional and student experience elements of those spaces are going to come together. So a small example might be, we're going to put together welding stations that, rather than being fully single human oriented, are going to have a tinted panel for observation so that a student can watch another student at work and then give them feedback. A panel like that probably isn't going to exist in a real welding environment, because we expect that welder to come in fully prepared to do the welding. But in this case, we're designing with the learning in mind that that industry is going to expect a student to have come in with. But in our secondary classroom, we need to make sure we have the capacity to facilitate.
Makes a lot of sense.
Yeah,
I'm going to go a little bit faster through some of these questions because I want, this is such fascinating. We could have made this, as I say, just a few questions and a few topics we're going through.
We'll do another one.
We will do another one. But David, I wanted to ask you, do you have, what are some recommendations when you are selecting equipment for a lab? Can you share with the audience here?
Besides, have a big budget. Okay.
Okay. We understand the budget. Yeah.
How about just a realistic budget? Okay. Let's look at that. No, I think first of all, depending on new construction or remodel, or even either or, taking stock of what you've got. That's a big thing. There's there's stuff that you've got to convince the teacher that's in there. You got to throw this out. It just is not going to jive in the new place. And so you got to make those decisions. Yeah. So what can you build upon that you already have? I think you also engaging with the experts, and we've heard this. I want to sound like a broken record as well, but the experts are the advisory board members. So engaging with them on what direction you go, as well as the teachers and administrators. Now, a big thing that we run into is we'll get into some situations where it's like the teachers, I got to have this, I got to have this, I got to have this. And they're gone the next year. And it was like a pet project for that person. And, it doesn't span it. So the whole point is that the lab, the equipment may very well last a lot longer than who's occupying that room. So that's where I think the next point to make is hiring a consultant. And like us, what we do is we can kind of take that the bias is out of the equation and look at it from just, from our perspective, neutral perspective, and say, hey, look, this is what we recommend you do based on what we see. Beyond that, there are attributes to consider, like, again, is it age appropriate? The quality, buying good quality equipment, systems is really important, I think. But you got to look at where it makes sense to do it. Okay. What gets the most use? Try to make things relevant and future-proof. Think about what the cost of ownership is going to be. 3D printers use a lot of materials. There are consumables that you have to buy, and so the maintenance contracts. Is curriculum included? That's a huge factor. Even basic pieces of equipment. Does it include equipment? It doesn't include a curriculum. And I think a big one here too is buying training systems versus live work. So trainers versus like working on a live car or a motor. Can you have something? There are many factors. Time, what it takes to work on that. You want students to have consistent work, so they're hitting certain competencies. And if you have people just driving their car in with a broken headlight, then they're never going to get that true work. So that's where training systems come into play. Sometimes they can be less costly, and they save space. And some of the pictures I've shown, it's also simulation software helps. So those are some factors.
And Diego, how do you design when you're designing? I'm hearing a lot about storage and organization. Is there specific things that you are designing now within brand new schools, even when you're thinking about CTE programs?
Yeah, I mean, I think the conversation is really important, understanding what you have and also being a mindful listener, in that not just taking account of, well, they told me they have these 10 things or these 10 boxes. Is like, what's in them? How do you use them? One of the things that we like to do is we have a conversation about, this is the stuff you have. What are you going to use this week? What are you going to use this month? And what are you going to use this semester? And so that tells you where things go, right? The stuff you're going to use once a semester, that can be down the corridor or around the way, right? The stuff that you're going to use this week can be in a closet in the room, and the stuff that you're going to use today is right there available. So understanding a little beyond just, we have stuff and stuff goes in places, but what is the stuff? When does it get used, and what is its purpose? And has it passed its useful life? Kind of to David's point, is it a pet project, or is it something that is still relevant? I think that also, to David's point, just using the right tools and the right technology. When David was talking about the simulators, there is for fundamentals, there's like as an example of a simulator for welding, which is just a VR set touching a plate. And so the space that you need, the exhaust and all that, is way smaller and way cheaper than trying to build a welding booth for teaching fundamentals. So really having the right consultants that can sort of guide that conversation and sort of open show you the options, that then you can say, well, maybe I don't need a full welding booth. A simulator will be fine for this, and having sort of a bit of a deeper conversation to understand the needs.
Perfect. And John, I wanted to ask you, because you and I have had a lot of conversations, and I promise we'll get, I know we're at our time, but what are some safety protocols that you've seen in place to ensure that students are safe with all of this equipment inside of the schools?
Yeah, so I think like obviously there's a wide variety of CTE spaces that don't have massive safety concerns outside of like really violent like professional gaming interactions or like pitch deck conflict. We have real live dangers of like hazardous chemicals and machinery, and so taking that into consideration obviously is really important. Having industry professionals who can educate students on safety protocols is obviously kind of front and center, but sometimes there's additional supports that are needed. So we actually work with a partner called Yonder that provides a full campus phone-free solution. We mentioned that because for young people and for adults even, phones are kind of the #1 distraction that they experience, and workplace hazards are, if they're going to be caused, oftentimes caused by distractions. And so this is a partner that provides full campus solutions that help with student mental health and like positive school climate and culture overall, but have some relevance within CTE spaces as well. So that if I'm a welding teacher, I can be relatively certain that my students are not going to be trying to do arc welding while texting whoever it is they're trying to text.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, I know we are at our time. This has been a great conversation. And before we end our time, I wanted to see, did anybody on the panel have any last minute thoughts? Did anything that you wanted to share before I see if there's questions from our guest? I think we need to do it again. I think we need to have part 2, which we will schedule for folks.
Yeah, I think that would be my question for folks who are hanging out and watching is obviously there's massive amounts of stuff still to talk about and cover. Like, what are some areas that if we had time today, you would have loved to see more time spent on? Because we'd love to put together some more of these and dive in a little bit more detailed with some specifics.
Absolutely. Did we have any questions, Jono, that were for any of our panelists for the day, or just?
We had one, but Bethany took care of it in the chat.
Okay.
So I think we're okay.
Well, I like, we were exactly at 4 o'clock, and I like, you know me, I try to stay punctual. I want to thank my panelists. Thank you so much. I've learned from you all. You all are fantastic. We'll be in touch. For those of you that have stayed on this long, thank you so much for being a part of our webinar. And as we shared, you can always reach out to any of us if you have any questions. I did want to share that if you want to find out what your specific state profile is when it comes to data enrollment, information on funding, I found this great website that is by state. You can go to at careertech.org. And it'll specifically by state tell you exactly how much funding the state is giving and all of that. So you're not alone. And I also wanted to leave you with our email addresses, myself, David, Diego, Bethany, Stephanie, and Jono. And again, thank you for participating. Thank you, panelists, for participating. And if you have any questions that did not get answered, feel free to reach out to any of us. And have a great afternoon. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, Ruth.
Thank you.
Bye, y'all.